Imagine writing a novel about a man who vanishes to the mountain. You spend months crafting the perfect mystery. You describe the dark trees. You describe the freezing wind. You write about how the man walks into the wild and is never seen again. And then, one afternoon, you put down your pen, you walk out your door, you step into those exact same mountains, and you never come back. It sounds like the plot of a Hollywood thriller, but in the summer of 1988, this nightmare became completely real. A man wrote his own disappearance, and then he lived it. His name was Keith Reinhard. He was a 49-year-old sports journalist living in Chicago. From the outside, he had a perfectly normal life. He had a wife, children, and a steady job. But inside, Keith was suffocating. He felt trapped in the loud, crowded city. He was approaching 50, and he felt like he had not achieved his true dream. Keith wanted to be a novelist. He wanted to write something important. He needed to escape. He needed silence. So, he made a decision that would change everything. He asked his boss for a 90-day leave of absence. He packed his bags. He left his family in Chicago, and he drove out west. He was looking for isolation, and he found it in a place called Silverplume. Silverplume, Colorado, is not a normal town. It sits high up in the Rocky Mountains. The elevation is over 9,000 feet. The air is thin. The winters are brutal. In 1988, the population was less than 200 people. It was an old, quiet mining town. It felt like a ghost town that time had forgotten. The town is surrounded by massive, towering mountains. They cast long, dark shadows over the streets. It is beautiful, but it is also deeply unforgiving. It was the perfect place for a writer to hide. Keith rented a small storefront right on the main street. He planned to open an antique shop during the day, and at night, he would write his great American novel. He set up his typewriter. He looked out the window at the looming mountains. He was finally alone. But what he did not know was that he was not the first person to seek refuge in that exact building, and he was not the first person to walk into a nightmare. Almost immediately, Keith learned a dark secret about his new shop. The locals told him about the man who rented the space before him. His name was Tom Young. Tom was a quiet man who ran a bookstore in that very same room. But 9 months before Keith arrived, Tom Young closed his shop. He took his dog. He walked up into the mountains, and he vanished without a single trace. No one knew what happened to him. There were no clues. There was no body, just an empty shop and a lingering mystery. For Keith, this story was intoxicating. He was a writer looking for inspiration, and he had just moved into the exact room where a missing man used to live. Keith became completely obsessed with Tom Young. He asked the locals endless questions. He walked the same streets Tom walked. He stared at the same mountains Tom stared at. He wanted to know what went through a man's mind right before he disappeared. And then Keith made a fateful choice. He decided to write his novel about Tom Young. He created a main character based on Tom, but as he wrote, something strange began to happen. The line between reality and fiction started to blur. Keith was no longer just writing about Tom. He was writing about himself. He began to relate to the missing man. They both wanted to escape. They both felt drawn to the wild. But then, the story took a horrifying turn. Just weeks after Keith moved to Silverplume, hunters made a gruesome discovery. High up in the mountains, hidden in the dense forest, they found a body. It was Tom Young. He had a gunshot wound to the head. Right next to him was his dog. The dog had also been shot. The police ruled it a suicide, but in a town as small and strange as Silverplume, rumors spread quickly. Some people whispered it was murder. For Keith, the discovery was a massive shock. The mystery he was writing about just ended in a dark, bloody tragedy. His muse was dead. The ending of his book was ruined. Keith's mental state began to shift. His friends noticed he was becoming more distant. He spent hours staring out the window at Pendleton Mountain. Pendleton Mountain is a massive, jagged peak that looms directly over the town. It is terrifying. It reaches over 12,000 feet into the sky. It is covered in thick, dark pine forest. Above the tree line, it is nothing but loose rocks, steep cliffs, and sudden drop-offs. It is not a mountain for casual hikers. It is a place where one wrong step means death. August 7th, 1988. It was late in the afternoon. The sun was already beginning to lower in the sky. Keith was sitting in his antique shop. He was talking with a few friends. Suddenly, he stood up. He told them he was going to hike up Pendleton Mountain. He said he wanted to reach the top. His friends looked at him in disbelief. It was 4 p.m. In the Rocky Mountains, you do not start a hike at 4 p.m. The temperature drops rapidly when the sun goes down. The darkness in the forest is absolute, and Keith was entirely unprepared. He was wearing a flannel shirt, blue jeans, and light sneakers. He had no flashlight. He had no heavy jacket. He had no survival gear. He had no water. His friends warned him. They told him it was too late. They told him the mountain was too dangerous. But Keith just smiled. He told them he would be back in a few hours. He stepped out the door. He walked toward the towering peak of Pendleton Mountain. And that was the last time anyone ever saw Keith Reinhard alive. By nightfall, Keith had not returned. The temperature on the mountain plunged. At 12,000 feet, the air becomes freezing cold, even in August. The wind howls through the trees. If Keith was still on the mountain, he was now in extreme danger. He was in total darkness. He had no way to see the steep cliffs. He had no way to keep warm. He was completely isolated. No signal, no help, no way out. The next morning, panic set in. Keith's friends called the authorities. A massive search and rescue operation was launched. This was not a small effort. Over the next week, helicopters flew over the mountain. Search dogs sniffed through the dense forests. Hundreds of volunteers combed the trails. They looked behind every rock. They checked every ravine. They searched the exact areas where Tom Young had been found. They expected to find Keith easily. He was a city man. He did not know wilderness. He could not have gone far. But as the days passed, a chilling reality set in. They found absolutely nothing. Not a footprint, not a torn piece of flannel, not a dropped sneaker. It was as if the mountain had simply swallowed him whole. The searchers were baffled. How does a grown man vanish without leaving a single trace? The dogs could not pick up his scent. The helicopters saw no movement. Keith Reinhard was gone. As the search dragged on, the survival window closed. A man in a flannel shirt cannot survive nights of freezing mountain temperatures. If he had fallen and broken his leg, he would have died of exposure. If he had gotten lost, dehydration and hypothermia would have killed him. But if he died on the mountain, where was his body? The town of Silver Plume fell into a deep paranoia. 2 men, the same shop, the same mountain, both vanished. People started to whisper. Was there a killer in the mountains? Did someone murder Tom Young and then murder Keith because he asked too many questions? It was a terrifying thought. Keith had been digging into Tom's death for his book. Did he uncover a secret someone wanted to keep hidden? Others had a different theory, a theory that was even more unsettling. They looked at Keith's life. He hated his job in Chicago. He wanted to escape his old life. Did he use the hike as a cover story? Did he walk into the woods, slip down the other side of the mountain, and hitchhike away? Did he stage his own disappearance to start a new life? It sounded possible, but his friends and family refused to believe it. Keith loved his children. He would never abandon them forever just to play out a fantasy. But then, investigators entered his empty antique shop. They looked at his desk. They looked at his typewriter. They found the manuscript he had been working on, the novel about the man who disappears in the mountains. And what they read sent shivers down their spines. The story Keith was writing was no longer just about Tom Young. It was about a character named Guy. Guy was a middle-aged man. Guy felt trapped in his life. Guy moved to a small mountain town to escape. Guy was fascinated by a man who vanished. Keith had literally written his own life onto the pages. But the most haunting part was not the plot. It was the final words Keith had typed before he walked out the door. They were sitting right there on the desk. the last thoughts of a man who was about to vanish from the face of the earth. The text described his character's ultimate desire. It read, "Guy realized that his only escape was into the wild. He had to walk into the trees. He had to become a ghost. He had to disappear completely, leaving nothing behind but a mystery." The police stared at the paper. It was a blueprint. It was a prophecy. Keith had written the exact script of his own doom. He had created a mystery on paper, and then he walked into the dark, freezing mountains to make it real. Decades have passed since that day in 1988. Pendleton Mountain still looms over the quiet streets of Silver Plume. The snow still falls. The wind still howls through the dark pine trees. Over the years, hikers have explored every inch of that mountain. Hunters have walked off the trails, but no one has ever found a single trace of Keith Reinhard. No bones, no clothes, nothing. The mystery remains completely unsolved. Did he slip and fall into a hidden crevice, lost forever in the dark? Was he murdered by someone waiting in the woods? Or did he orchestrate the greatest vanishing act in history, living out the rest of his days under a new name? No one knows. Keith Reinhard wanted to write a perfect mystery. He wanted to write a story that people would never forget. He wanted to create a legend. He failed to finish his book, but he succeeded in his goal, because the story he left behind is more terrifying than any novel. He walked out the door. He looked up at the jagged peaks, and he became the ghost he always wanted to be.